Hey, so recently I was going through Relay's documentation and I found this section on preloaded queries, which talks about rendering as you fetch your data. So what it is saying is a typical React app might look like this. So you have a component or a page which first renders, then you might have a use effect or a data fetching library, which like after the page is rendered, it sends a network call. It processes the response, and then the component renders with the updated data. Or you might have a component for which the code is getting lazy loaded. So let's say you have a modal, which is shown when a user clicks on a button. So the flow would look something like this. The user clicks on the button. In the background, now you start like loading the component code. The code gets loaded and then you show the modal. Then you show a spinner while in the background you fetch the data to be shown in the modal. When the fetch is complete, you then process the response and then you show the modal with the updated data. So Relay says, why can't these two steps be done in parallel? Why can't you download and pass the component code and send the network call at the same time, process the response, do both of these things in parallel, and then render the component at and then render the component with the updated data. So you can definitely use preloaded queries for this, but there's a better way to do it, which is so Relay has something called entry points. Now, while trying to implement these Entrypoint APIs myself, I found that the documentation is particularly lacking for Relay. There aren't any docs, and all you can find is an API reference. So I was trying to, so I have sort of implemented this thing for a dummy app, and let me show you what the app is doing. So for this particular use case where there's a page, you have a button. You click a button, and the dialog box loads and shows you some data. And that is exactly what this dummy app is. So it's basically using a API which has some data for the Star Wars franchise. And whenever you click on a character, you see a modal with some details for that particular character in the film. So now, okay, I'll show you something. If I click on a character over here, if you pay close attention to this, like the flame graph over here, you can see that there are two parallel calls. The first one is for fetching the code for this particular model, and the other is a network call which fetches this data to be shown in the model. So ignore the null values. There's something broken with the API right now. But yeah, so we are currently doing these two calls in parallel, fetching the component code for the model and the network fetch as well. Since the both of these sizes are really small, you might not see a lot of impact right now, but let's say you have like a really large GraphQL response and a really large modal, and that's when this pattern will really shine. So I had some problems while implementing this myself. And once I got this to work, I sort of wanted to record this video to show how exactly you can implement this pattern with using just React Relay. And yeah, so that's what I have over here. So I have a component called person, which is basically the like the character list item over here. And so there's a button whenever someone clicks on on the button, which is basically the character's name, we sort of say that yeah, we want to load that particular entry point, which is basically a modal in this case. So it starts with creating an entry point. So an entry point is where you define what bundle of code you want to load and which is the query that you want to preload. In my case, I have both the query and the modal itself defined in the same file over here. So this is the query that I'm trying to preload, and this is obviously the code for the modal itself. So I created a file called Entrypoint. You name it whatever you want. And over here, if you look closely, I just have like some utilities built over a simple import function. Obviously, the code for this is going to be open source, and I'm going to put the link to all of this code in the description for this video if you want to go through that. So over here, I'm saying like which module I want to be lazy loaded. And over here, I'm defining which query I want to preload while the modal code is currently loading. So in my case, it's the person details query since that is what I'm fetching. And with that, I've sort of created an entry point. And the create entry point function is just a utility over something that React Relay provides. I just wanted some stronger types. And yeah, it doesn't do much, just returns a param object. So now we've created an entry point. We can now use that entry point. So going back to the person component over here, so we use a hook provided by React Relay called use entrypoint loader. For this, we have to provide at the relay environment. The relay environment is something you can get using the use relay environment hook again from relay. And this is just a provider that you wrap your app with when you're starting to use relay. So we provide it with the environment and the entry point that was in the other file that we just saw. And it gives us two things, entry point reference and load entry point. Entry point reference is to be passed to a component provided by relay called entry point container. Entry point container is basically where your entry point is going to sit in the React tree. And we wrap it with suspense since this is suspenseful data loading. So you can have your fallback and still use React suspenseful data fetching or data loading function. And yeah, you define your fallback component over here. In my case, I just have some loading text. I'm passing my entry point reference to the entry point reference props. I'm not passing any props to my component that I'm lazy loading, so I don't have anything over here. But yeah, whenever someone clicks on the name of a character, this function gets triggered, and we call load entry point function, which is returned by use entry point loader with whatever variables you want to pass to the query, the data fetching query. So that does that, and that's sort of how you get this to work. Once again, if I and show it to you here, you can see that this is getting fetched in parallel. And that pretty much concludes this. If you have any questions, do let me know. Thank you.